Remaking a classic is no easy feat for game developers. If done poorly, it can anger fans of the original and fail to capture newcomers. There's a lot of pressure on developers to make the best product they can. Trials of Mana is one of the latest examples of this done right, bringing the 1995 Super Nintendo classic into the modern era. The farthest back the series goes, as far as anyone can tell, is the year 1987 through the cancelled project Seiken Densetsu: The Emergence of Excalibur, which was intended to be an extensive 5-disc release for the original Famicom. The game was eventually cancelled in October of that year, and those who had ordered it were refunded. That wasn't it, however, as they were also told this in a letter announcing the cancellation. In the middle of December, a game will be released with the same gist of Seiken Densetsu, an RPG with a 4-character party, for 5,900 yen. Those who have reserved Seiken Densetsu will have their reserve fees refunded. If you would like, by all means, please take this chance to reserve Final Fantasy. Despite the cancellation, Square decided to trademark the name Seiken Densetsu anyways, in order to avoid losing it. The trademark was then used in 1991 for a completely unrelated project on the Game Boy, which was titled Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden, which was then released in the States as Final Fantasy Adventure and in Europe as Mystic Quest. Not to be confused with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, mind you, that's something completely different. The series then broke off from Final Fantasy to become its own thing in 1993 with the release of Seiken Densetsu 2, which was localized as Secret of Mana, a game that I do not like at all. That brings us to today's topic. The third game in the series, known as Seiken Densetsu 3, released in 1995 for the Super Famicom. Initially, the developers had decided to have the game connect to Secret of Mana, but decided against it during development. According to the game's director Koichi Ishii in an interview with Famitsu magazine, "We more or less wanted SD3 to be a continuation of Secret of Mana, but we ended up scrapping all the code from Secret of Mana. It was like, all these parts that weren't interesting? Let's try starting from a blank slate and find another way." So essentially, we reconstructed all of the programming for SD3 anew. Director Hiromichi Tanaka further elaborated, saying, "SD3 takes place in a completely unrelated world from Secret of Mana. It's similar to how each Final Fantasy game changes everything, but always keeps the crystals. However, our overall mindset, how we think about the games, is something we've carried over to the sequel, including our underlying ideas about mana. It's similar to the first Seiken Densetsu game, maybe. The Mana Tree and the Mana Sword, which have been important throughout the series, again make an appearance here." The development was far from smooth, however, as with next-gen systems on the horizon, the team was unable to extend development, all while working with a fairly small staff, as many people were being assigned to other games that were in development at the time, namely Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. The finished product, while released in Japan, never saw the light of day in English, which was due to issues with the technology at the time. Series producer Masaru Omayata told The Hollywood Reporter in 2020, "When the original Trials of Mana was developed, it barely fit within the confines of the data capacity available for the Super Famicom at the time. This meant there was no additional space that could accommodate localized data. It was due to this that the game was canceled despite being formally announced in North America as Secret of Mana 2. And then the game sat dormant for almost 2 decades. A fan translation was created and released onto the internet in 2000, but there was no official way to enjoy this game in English. That all changed in 2019 with the release of the Collection of Mana on the Nintendo Switch, which finally brought an official translation to the West. The team who worked on the collection were apparently aware of the fan translation, and according to Omayata, the localization team took the translation and the next thing they said was, "We're gonna show them up." I'm sure that the people that worked on the pirated version worked with the best that was available to them, but we really wanted to do as good a job as we possibly could. To be honest, Square probably could have ended here and been fine, but they decided to take it one step further, as they had started development on a full 3D remake. Taking cues from the Secret of Mana remake, which was panned by critics and fans alike, the team decided, instead of remaining faithful to the original with just updated graphics, the team would instead build an entirely new game from the ground up. Oyamada told games journalist Jason Schreier in an interview at E3 2019, "With Trials of Mana, we really challenged ourselves to provide mana in a new form, different from how it used to be. And so after the fans see the story and actually play this game for themselves, we would like their feedback on their expectations for the Mana games to come, and take that into consideration for the future. Apparently, the team had actually planned the remake first, and then the collection came later after showing it to the Western teams, who liked what they saw but still expressed a desire for the original version as well. Hence the reason we got both. When looking at the two games, we see a lot of differences right off the bat. Obviously, one is in 2D and the other is in 3D, and thus the different camera perspectives lead to inherent differences in combat. However, the changes to the combat are a bit more drastic than what we have between, say, A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, where the general selection of actions are the same, just adapted for their respective camera angles. The original game utilized a combat system fairly similar in appearance to Secret of Mana, with certain aspects removed such as leveling for weapons and spells, as well as the recharge meter for attacks. And although you'd think the removal of the latter would speed up the flow of gameplay, and to an extent it does, the game still feels sluggish compared to games like A Link to the Past. This probably has a lot to do with how demanding the game was on the SNES hardware. Tanaka explained, in turn-based RPGs, there's ample time for the processor to calculate everything, display damage, etc. But in the Seiken Densetsu games, everything has to be done in real time, and the load on the processor is much larger. It's more CPU intensive than Chrono Trigger, actually. This sluggishness is compounded by the fact that everything stops whenever a character uses an ability or an item, making it so that no one can move until the animation finishes. So what are you going to do in year 2020 when this isn't going to be an issue, as processors are more than capable of performing all the needed calculations within a single frame? One route would be to just recreate the game's general feel and flow of combat, but the team already did that with the Secret of Mana remake, and it didn't turn out quite so well. Instead, the developers opted to take a cue from more modern action games and give us the typical tried and true actions: strong attack, weak attacks, and dodge rolls. The game also adds the ability to charge up strong attacks, which can be used to break shields on certain enemies. Enemies also now telegraph their more powerful attacks, giving the player a visual AoE cue, allowing them time to get out of the way. The game also features a lock-on mechanic that isn't explained all that well and is mapped to a somewhat unintuitive button, which is why you don't see it in any of my footage, because I went the entire playthrough without using it and only learned about it when I sat down to write the script for this video. The remake also retools the power gauge system, replacing them with class strikes, which are super moves that are unlocked each time a character changes class. All of this makes it so the game has a much smoother flow of combat, reminiscent of other Square published action RPGs such as Kingdom Hearts and Nier Automata. There's more than just gameplay, however, as the game needed to make other major changes in order to ensure it feels sufficiently modern. This meant that areas were no longer broken up into individual screens that you travel between, but instead are single continuous areas. This means that further changes to the combat system were necessary, as combat encounters were partially handled by having multiple screens in the original. The remake instead makes it so that when you get into a battle, a ring is set up around the enemies that dictates the boundaries of the fight. This allows you to have the visual appearance of a single area, but still constrain the movement area for combat. This also allows the player to flee from fights simply by walking outside of the boundaries of the battle, similar to how they would do so in the original by walking off screen. The last major mechanic update to the game regarded how characters level up. In the original, when a character leveled up, you would be asked to select one of their stats to be upgraded by 1 right then and there. This gave you a much higher degree of choice when compared to other JRPGs at the time. The game modernizes this by introducing what it calls training points, which are earned when a character levels up and can be allocated whenever they want from the menu. This frees the player up from having to make a choice on the spot and allows them to save up points and invest them all at once if they so desire. In addition, the way stat allocation works is different, with the characters having a list of abilities that can be equipped from the equipment screen and stat gains that are unlocked as points are allocated into each one. This makes it so the player has a reason to invest in stats that may not directly benefit the character in question, as they may contain an ability that you might want. The game also features several welcomed quality of life changes that help alleviate some of the issues with the original. The first of these is the item limit. In the original, you could only stock 9 of an item from your inventory into the ring menus, and after battle, you would need to restock from your inventory in order to get access to more. The remake streamlines this by making it so that you have access to your full stock outside of battle, and then capping you at 9 in battle, reducing the number of times you need to dive into the menu. The other fantastic change is the inclusion of quest markers. I know some people think this is hand-holding, and if you think that, just go into the menu and turn it off. But for those who don't, you'll find that a lot of objectives in this game involve talking to specific NPCs. In the original, you really weren't given any indication of whether or not you talked to the right guy or not. This change allows players to spend less time stumbling around because they haven't talked to the one guy who advances the plot, so you can get back to the main gameplay faster, thus improving the general flow of the game and just showing more respect for the player's time. Moving into the art direction, the remake needed to find a way to still capture the same spirit as the original, despite the difference in visual presentation. So how did they do? To answer that, we need to figure out what exactly the original was going for. When looking at the original graphics, we see the game uses a fair number of bright pastel colors, which Tanaka explained was because Seiken Densetsu isn't meant to be realistic like Final Fantasy. It's composed more with fantasy imagery in mind, with Ishii adding, "Visually we wanted to go for a more storybook fantasy vibe rather than something realistic." When we look at the remake, we see how this vision still shines through. Compare the graphics of Trials of Mana with that of another very popular remake this year. The Final Fantasy VII Remake has a fairly serious tone to it. The game strives to have that dark, gritty, realistic look to it, which is why it lends itself so well to having fairly photorealistic graphics. Trials of Mana, on the other hand, opted to go for a more cartoony, hyper-stylized graphical presentation. One that still looks great, mind you, but isn't as realistic or high fidelity as other games. The art style of this game maintains the same overall bright color palette, which causes it to retain the same general storybook fantasy vibe as the original. Something that the game desperately needs, as the story would not work with a more realistic visual style. Speaking of the story, let's talk about that, shall we? Similar to Secret of Mana, the plot is just barely there. It's nothing to write home about. The big selling point of this game is how there are 6 different characters and you choose a party of 3 at the start. Depending on who you pick, the game progresses upon 3 different storylines, each with their own villain and final boss. If you couldn't already tell from the thumbnail and gameplay footage, I went with Hawkeye and Reese's route for my playthrough. In execution, while the concept is fairly novel, the routes end up being mostly the same. They all wind up converging fairly early on and then funnel you through the same set of events, occasionally branching off to have you go to a specific location depending on what route you're on. The main issue with this arises with the fact that the game has all 3 villains there at the start and has all of them seeking out the Mana Sword, only just to have whichever one is associated with your protagonist kill off the other 2 at the halfway point so the game can focus solely on your one bad guy, which kind of trivializes the multiple routes thing. Like, why am I gonna play this game several times if it's just gonna play out mostly the same with minor variations depending on who the bad guy is? This is the one aspect of the game that the remake really can't improve on that much, which means they were kinda stuck with it. I get that this was the result of technical limitations on the Super Famicom and all, but it makes me really unlikely to want to go in for a second or third playthrough. The game does what it can to incentivize you by having a New Game Plus mode, but given that you have to do the new post-game story to access it, it's still kinda not worth it. Especially given that retaining your levels makes it so that the game will just lack all semblance of challenge and you're better off just starting from scratch anyways. The game does offer one solid improvement to the story, which allows you to reduce the number of playthroughs required to see everything. This change is allowing you to play through the prologue of your companions. In the original, you only got a brief summary of what happened, but no way to actually watch the cutscenes, meaning to truly see everything, you'd have to play through the entire game 6 times. Now that you can experience the prologues of all of your party members on just one save file, the number of times you have to play through the game is now reduced to 3, 1 for each route. There is one last thing we need to talk about with this remake regarding the story, and I think you know what I'm referring to.
Carl! How did this happen?
So the voice acting isn't the best, although I definitely can think of worse. There are so many weird choices that were made in this game. Charlotte is by far the worst.
Can I come with? Can I? Please? I heard what you were talking to Grandpa about. You are no simple adventurer.
Like, what were they thinking here? Everything else I can live with. I grew up with Final Fantasy X and Super Mario Sunshine. I can handle bad voice acting, but it makes it so hard to take this game seriously. I mean, the plot isn't super serious most of the time anyways, but it definitely explores darker themes at times, and they just get undercut by these comically bad performances. I kept finding myself laughing at points that clearly weren't meant to be funny. I don't know, I kind of find it charming though, in an it's so bad it's good kind of way. Just don't pick Charlotte and you'll be fine. Overall, Trials of Mana is a fantastic remake for a game that, while the original aged pretty well, still has enough relics of the past where the changes are very welcome. If you haven't played this game, I highly suggest you do so. But seriously, don't pick Charlotte, you'll hate your life for 15 to 20 hours.